Panoptica, Cisco's cloud application security solution, provides continuous cloud application security, compliance, and monitoring at scale, giving customers deep visibility, risk evaluation with context, and actionable remediation insights to secure their entire inventory of cloud assets. Visit panoptica.app to learn more.
Packet pushers.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Packet Protector, the intersection of cybersecurity and networking. I'm Jennifer JJ Manella, and as always, here with Drew Connie Murray. And we have a fun episode for you this week. No guests, just some awesome updates, news, things to scare you, stuff to pay attention to, and a quick recap from this year's RSA conference where Drew and I were together, but doing all different things. So Drew was out doing a lot of interviews and updates with some of the sponsors and vendors. I was speaking. And so we have all kinds of interesting things we learned and saw that we want to run by you and share with you.
But first, let's get into some news headlines. There is a new report out from a cyber insurance company finding that remote access tools are the intrusion point of choice for attackers, at least in 2023.
Duh.
Right.
Here's a novel idea. How about we use something used to access a system remotely to get to the system remotely? That's new.
Yeah. Why do I rob banks? Because that's where the money is.
It was interesting, though, because they threw a bunch of numbers out. I will put the link in the show notes here, but some of the things that it said was it talked about self-managed VPNs, and it specifically called out different vendors along the way in the bullets. But self-managed VPNs from Cisco and Citrix were 11 times more likely to be linked to a ransomware attack than last year. And this is the at-bay research that we'll link to there. And then, Drew, they talked about also self-managed Fortinet VPNs being 5 times more likely to be linked to a ransomware attack than a cloud VPN. So there's a lot of loosey-goosey language in the report. I'm assuming self-managed VPNs are meaning an organization itself is managing the VPN versus a cloud-managed VPN. So what I'm kind of thinking here, and I'll have to maybe dig a little deeper into this, but that the cloud VPNs might be more what we're using, I would almost say for consumer standpoint for privacy, so that when you're, floating around and navigating through the world, you aren't exposing your data paths to everybody.
You mean like a sort of more of a consumer VPN product?
Yeah, that attaches into the cloud. Whereas an enterprise VPN is typically used for accessing data.
Right.
There are other use cases, but typically you're VPNing into something to get to something versus VPNing to encrypt.
Just to disguise where I'm going, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. So something interesting to kind of look at there, but it also, I think, shines the spotlight on the fact that we need to do a little bit better job keeping tabs on who's using what, especially for remote access, where those things are installed, how they're secured, and all that jazz.
Are they using strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, that kind of thing? If that's the keys to the kingdom, you got to protect those keys.
Yep. Speaking of keys.
See what I did there?
Ding, ding, ding. Drew's here all week, guys.
Yeah, so speaking of keys, Teslas can still be stolen with essentially a wireless hack.
Yeah, and I think most of these things are used over Bluetooth. And I guess I had heard rustlings of this from before and didn't really pay a lot of attention to it because I thought it had been resolved and nipped in the bud pretty quickly. But they're talking about relay attacks over RF, which is just from a radio frequency standpoint, kind of capturing a signal from one thing and over that same frequency, relaying it or forwarding it over some distance to the target. So in this case, relaying the radio frequency coming out of the user's or the car owner's actual key or the phone that is attached to the car. And then that's how the car knows that the owner is nearby, and relaying that to the car from an attacker so that when the user is, somewhere far away or maybe sleeping in bed at night, that signal can kind of be captured and put near the vehicle and trick the vehicle into thinking that the owner is standing next to it.
Yeah, so I guess Tesla made some changes to the frequencies they were using, but apparently it didn't fix the problem.
Yeah, so it sounded like they were going to try to use ultra wideband, which is supposedly more accurate when it comes to physically telling where the signal is coming from and being able to sort of triangulate's the wrong word, but locate it in relationship to how and where it's moving to in relationship to the vehicle. I see there was it in 2020, there was a FCC filing with Tesla where, let me just read this, where it actually just said it would be implementing ultra wideband in its keyless entry systems, and the ability to far more precisely measure the distance of a key fob or a smartphone from a car would, or at least could, prevent its vehicle from being stolen via these relay attacks, because the distance estimate is based on a time of flight measurement, which is immune to relay attacks, which is what they said.
And that quote's coming from a Wired story.
Yes.
Yeah, but apparently, I guess, so Tesla is using the ultra wideband communication, but that time of flight measurement, I don't know what happened there, but it's not working.
Yeah, it sounds like they didn't implement it for that purpose, or they didn't maybe enable the features that they need or use that to check that whole time of flight measurements for the distance and the movement. So the TLDR here is that there is an option for a pen to put a code in, because if without that, if the car thinks you're near it and you don't have that enabled, somebody can open the car, get in the car, and drive the car away. Probably not the coolest thing. Apparently, this is actually happening, and some people are keeping their keys in Faraday bags. And then I saw one note that people were keeping them in the freezer.
You know, when needs must.
I've heard of some weird stuff being kept in the freezer, but not car keys. So that one's new for me.
Yeah, so I guess if you have that PIN feature, you might want to enable it if you have a Tesla and are worried about theft.
Yeah. And I'm guessing the PIN number is like 4 or 6 digits. So, not a surefire security mechanism, but definitely something better than nothing.
Yeah, belt and suspenders approach, particularly for this kind of relay or replay attack.
Yeah.
In other news, D-Link is, I guess, joining CISA's list of shame because of this end-of-life D-Link routers have known exploitable vulnerabilities. I think they're 10 years old at this point, and CISA's adding them to their list of vulnerabilities to be aware of.
Yeah, and I think what's different here, it's not different, but the inflection point here, because this is a 10-year-old vulnerability, or there's actually 2 of them, is it is now in CISA's KEV, which is their known exploited vulnerabilities. So that means it's not just a vulnerability. It means that it's being observed in the wild
With active exploits.
10 years after. Yeah. So that's why they're saying pay a little bit of attention to it now.
Right. Yeah, and the thing is with end-of-life routers, they're often used by home users who may be connecting to work and don't really know or care that it's end-of-life. And frankly, I feel like it's not really their responsibility to be worried about it. But yes, these routers are still out there, probably widely used. So this could be a concern for you if you're managing a remote or hybrid workforce.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because I get this question a lot through different, consulting requests coming in from clients of, for this remote home user model, what do they need to do, or should they be doing something to secure the home network better? There's a bunch of, if then else statements, and it depends, of course, with the little trademark there. But at the end of the day, if the users are also floating around in public spaces and public networks and hotspots, you probably need to focus your attention on the endpoint. But certainly we've seen, let's rewind to, I think it was LastPass, where one of the primary developers, the 4 people that had sort of the keys to the kingdom into the production environment for a password manager, his system ultimately was breached through an initial intrusion into the home network and then pivoting through a Plex server. I do think this is a concern, and this is specifically the D-Link DIR 600 and 605 routers. Each of those have a different CVE and a vulnerability. One is a cross-site request forgery issue, and the other CVE lets attackers steal username and passwords in plain text, and that's for the 605. Now, one of these, I think it might be the 600. Actually, this was patched while that device was in service. And so there is a patch available for that one.
Okay.
Yeah, it is the 600 series, actually. But the 605s should just be probably unplugged from the network. And maybe if you have a spot in your garden where you buried Fluffy, when Fluffy died a few years ago, you should just put that 605 router in the ground and maybe put a little in memoriam sign above it and let it die.
Are we burying our home routers now? Is that responsible disposal?
Well, why not? If you put it in the trash can, it's just going to end up in the landfill.
That's true. It'll end up in the same place anyway. That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. At least this way you can remember it and you can applaud yourself for being so security aware every time you stroll through the roses.
When you visit Fluffy, you can also remember fondly that D-Link router.
Yes.
And you just wanted to mention, JJ, quickly, some conversation around a new Wi-Fi standard vulnerability.
I do. So some people have asked me my thoughts on this. I've not dug into it deeply yet, but there was a attack that I think it's called SSID confusion attack from Matthew. So smart guys, smart people, smart researchers. I think they're really kind of maybe reached a little far on this one and stretched a little bit because there are so many other attacks that are way more impactful and way easier. But let me give you the short version. And then I think, Drew, what would be really fun is to maybe get Stephen Orr on if he's willing and come dive into the very nitty gritty technical nuances of this. Stephen Orr is a distinguished Cisco engineer and long time participant and leader in the security work groups related to Wi-Fi. So both on the 802.11 side as well as the Wi-Fi Alliance. So the best person in the world to talk about these things, and he's quite hilarious. But long version short for now, what they're saying is if you have especially credential reuse and passphrase reuse, let me just use the example of a passphrase-based network. What they're saying is if you have the same credentials allowed on two separate networks in your organization on two different SSIDs, then they could launch an attack. And the example that they gave, now there's other ways to go about this. The example that they gave, though, was a 2.4 gigahertz network and a 5 gigahertz network that you might have running as separate SSIDs instead of one SSID that does both. But what they're saying is that you might intend to attach to that 5 gigahertz network, and they would be able to relay and replay and basically inject themselves as a man in the middle, effectively attach you to the 2.4 network with those same credentials, and you wouldn't know that. So they're sitting in line, but then they've also presumably put you on a network that, I'm going to air quote here, you guys can't see me, but what they're assuming here is that the 2.4 gigahertz network is less secure and that the 5 gigahertz network is being served off of newer access points with better security features and controls. And that whole premise is just wrong. I mean, not that that can't happen, but that's not normally what happens. If you have two networks and they have the same passphrase on them, it's usually served by the same equipment. And the intention in that architecture is that the endpoint is expected to and allowed to connect to either one of those networks, right? The 2.4 or the 5 gigahertz. It's just a different frequency. So this idea that you think you're getting on a 5 network and somehow that's really secure and we're going to push you down to your own still 2.4. Anyway, the whole thing is just crazy. They also, in the paper, reference 802.11x. It's not 11x, it's 1x. Everybody that knows me knows I feel very passionately about this, and this infuriates me. And I had to stop reading the paper when I got to that point. Take a deep breath, and I'll come back to it later.
No typos allowed.
Yeah.
They are two different things, so yes.
Yeah, there's other ways. If you're just trying to push somebody to do a 2.4 network so that you think you can do some other attacks there, there's other ways to coax a network there. The recommendations coming out of this paper are to tell, well, they said the Wi-Fi Alliance, but it's actually IEEE that makes this 802.11 standard, to put the SSID name in the four-way handshake for Wi-Fi. But that doesn't protect anybody from the same type of attacks we've been doing for almost 20 years. I mean, in my first book, Low Tech Hacking, one of the things referenced in there was Rich Mogul, who was on here as a guest a couple of episodes ago. Back in 2008, DEF CON did an evil twin AP attack, which is effectively the same thing, except for it's a little bit more straightforward than this sort of convoluted thing in the new report. You could just as easily spin up a rogue AP. And AP could be a piece of software running on a laptop, right? But you could spin up a rogue AP and network that completely mimics the SSID with the same passphrase and same name and get yourself between the target machine and the real network and do the same thing without jumping through all of the hoops that they're jumping through. So there's more to this that I'm covering right now, but for right now, I'd say don't worry about it. And maybe we'll get Stephen Orr on and we'll dive a little more deeply into it.
Yeah, and in the meantime, there are links in the show notes if you want to read up on this SSID confusion attack. Another story to cover, you may have heard by now that Microsoft has previewed a forthcoming feature of its Copilot Plus PCs. It's called Recall. The feature takes screenshots of your laptop every 5 seconds. Microsoft says, quote, your snapshots are then locally stored and locally analyzed on your PC. Recall's analysis allows you to search for content, including both images and text, using natural language. So I think they're trying to position this as kind of an AI feature and advanced search, although it's also frightening a lot of privacy advocates and security professionals.
Hell to the no.
Yeah, no thank you.
I mean, this is probably creeping out everybody. I don't think you have to be a privacy or a security person to be like, no, Microsoft, just no.
Yes.
I had not heard this. I'm kind of glad I had not heard this until you brought it up. I'm not okay with this. I think this is an absolutely horrible idea.
And Microsoft says, snapshots are encrypted. They can only be accessed locally on the PC by whoever has the login credential. Microsoft says they are not accessing the snapshots, in Microsoft Corporation Central. You can also configure recall to exclude websites you don't want snapshotted. That is assuming you're using their Edge browser or another Chromium-based browser. But yeah, I feel like, okay, so they had a sense that this could alarm people, but I think the fact that it needing local access doesn't make me feel any better. And the fact that, okay, you're going to ask people to do more work setting up, policies about what they want snapshotted and what they don't want snapshotted. And otherwise, it's just going to be taking pictures of everything, which could include my banking information, healthcare information, searches that I feel are confidential or private to me are now sitting on my machine. And yes, they're encrypted and I need to log in and access them. But again, this feels super creepy and unwanted, frankly. I don't know who thought this would be a feature. People would be like, it sounds good to me.
I would be interested to look into this a little bit more later and understand what they thought that the outcome of this could be. So I think there's this personal creepy perspective, but from a corporate standpoint, imagine if you have a team of executives or legal counsel. So this could be an adversarial movement, or
Mhm.
it could be maybe something a little bit less nefarious, but it could be somebody searching for this information or that would like to get this information that would like some competitive advantage or to capture some intellectual property.
Mhm.
It could also be, depending on, who you're looking at and what they're doing, it could be a telltale sign if you were able to get this information of an impending relationship or merger or acquisition or some, major shift that should be under tight-lipped, tightly controlled, under embargo, not being discussed and publicized for several reasons. And I think this, okay, is going to live locally. The thing that is it's catch 22, right? Maybe the cloud is the most secure for certain things, but these endpoints are floating around. So physically, it's not a secure device. It's moving around, it's mobile. There are ways into these devices. I mean, not the least of which is, I just got back very, very late last night from a trip, and the number of people who just well-dressed business people who are leaving their laptops and their phones unlocked and unattended as they stroll through the airport lounge or anywhere it's unbelievable. Anyway, so these things are floating around, but also I don't think it would be hard for somebody to get, malware on an endpoint. Because if you get malware or some type of spyware that has the credential access it needs to, it can act as you and it can be persistent there on that endpoint. Yeah, not a warm, fuzzy feeling for me.
Panoptica, Cisco's cloud application security solution, provides end-to-end lifecycle protection for cloud-native application environments. It empowers organizations to safeguard their APIs, serverless functions, containers, and Kubernetes environments. Panoptica ensures comprehensive cloud security, compliance, and monitoring at scale, offering deep visibility, contextual risk assessments, and actionable remediation insights for all your cloud assets. Powered by graph-based technology, Panoptica's attack path engine prioritizes and offers dynamic remediation for vulnerable attack vectors, helping security teams quickly identify and remediate potential risks across cloud infrastructures. Panoptica utilizes advanced attack path analysis, root cause analysis, and dynamic remediation techniques to reveal potential risks from an attacker's viewpoint. Visit panoptica.app to learn more.
I also wonder about, people have raised the issue of if you are potentially in an abusive relationship or something that, you're looking for help or whatever on your laptop, that could be discovered with this feature. So it's just all around bad. I also feel like computers are already, frankly, storing and remembering most stuff I do anyway. Do I just, technically speaking, need another layer of data storage and analytics and search just because, like, the example Microsoft gives is, what's that Korean restaurant that I looked at the website of 2 days ago and don't remember? Like, okay, I guess that's maybe an interesting use case, but it doesn't seem worth the trade-off to me.
No, and you know what? Screw Microsoft Edge browser. If you're using, whatever you're using, if you're in an Apple ecosystem and you've got
Right.
Safari, if you're in the Google ecosystem, I can sync all of that history between my devices and I can refine that very quickly other ways. It don't need
Yes.
my laptop spying on me, in addition to all of the applications I use already spying on me.
Yes. The UK's Information Commissioner's Office, which is a data watchdog agency, is, quote, making inquiries to Microsoft about this recall feature, according to the BBC. A lot of the backlash I've seen on social media has been pretty intense, so I'm curious if, we'll be revisiting this story in a few subsequent episodes to see if there's any pullback on this.
When is this rolling out and can you opt out of it?
Microsoft says, yes, you can also opt out of it. You don't have to run this feature if you don't want it. But again, it's like, okay, yes, it's good to give you an opt out, but relying on consumers to take the necessary steps to make their device more secure is not a great strategy. At least hasn't been in the past.
No. Speaking of opting out.
Yeah, so I guess Slash ran into some backlash with an announcement that it was going to take customer data from the Slack platform and use it for AI and ML. It did also have an opt-out feature, but apparently that wasn't good enough.
So a couple things there. I don't know about you guys. I'm in like 18 or 20 different Slack workspaces. Drew, we use it for planning podcasts. There is an entire packet pushers community on there with many thousands of people using it. And this was definitely some scuttlebutt happening around this last week. As a user, you can't opt out. As an admin for that workspace, you can opt out, but there's not a setting. You can't log in and just manage a setting. You have to actually email them with a specific phrasing in the subject line to parse it and blah, blah, blah. And apparently there's some other hoops to jump through related to that.
Mhm.
It sounds like in the past few hours now, so we're recording this May 22nd. You guys will be hearing this in a few weeks in early June. So it sounds like, between now and then more stuff will have happened. But just in the past, day or so, Slack came back and said, no, we're not using your data to train AI. We're using it for internal machine learning that is not specific to the user. It's anonymized. And they kind of tease out some of the differences and try to clarify that language. It reminds me of Zoom a few months ago when Zoom said they were going to start using the Zoom content, audio and video and transcripts to train AI. And then they came back and said, oh, no, sorry, everybody misunderstood. What we actually meant was we're going to be doing this other thing with it instead. So I think there's going to be a lot of this. It's just something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, for sure. All of these platforms that essentially we are creating data on are ripe targets for essentially data harvesting because all that data has value to somebody, particularly now in this AI boom as AI companies are looking for more and more and more information to train models on. So super boring, but having to read those privacy policies is suddenly going to become much more important.
Yep.
All right, so let's dive into the rest of the show. As you mentioned earlier, JJ, you and I were both at the RSA conference in San Francisco 2024, and we just thought we'd sort of recap and talk about some of the things that jumped out at us at the show.
Yeah.
The security industry is very robust. If the number of booths and attendees is any indicator, I guess there were more than 41,000 people who came and 600 exhibitors. Both sides of the Moscone Center were full. It seemed like there was a lot of activity going on the show floor. So, it's not hard data, but as sort of just a general vibes barometer, it felt like the security industry is there's a lot of activity happening.
There is a lot of activity. It's almost overwhelming. And I've seen a few people, and actually I feel the same way. I've seen a few people kind of comment on just the sheer volume. I mean, walking around the expo floor.
Like literal volume, not to mention, volume of space.
Yes.
It was loud down there.
They should give you earplugs in your little bag when you check in. Holy smokes, it's loud. But there's also just a lot there. I mean, 600 exhibitors is a lot. And, I remember back in the day, we used to kind of talk about the ring of innovation where you have all of the really big booths in the middle. And then you kind of had the little, 10 by 10, like chamber of commerce size, set up with the pipe and drape around the outside. And that was kind of cool because over time, what you would see is those little companies and those little tabletop booths will start to kind of move inward from an expo floor standpoint until they got acquired by one of the big booths. And then you would see them, of course, there the next year.
Tracking their progress from the outside of the ring toward the center, the profitable center where the giant booths are.
But I couldn't even make it a whole lap around. This is like, I'm telling myself here. So there's Moscone North and there's Moscone South, which and for anybody listening, like it's a really big facility. The expo floor is on the bottom and it's connected by a hallway between north and south, which are on separate sides of a small road that cuts through them. And it used to be there was north and then there was south. And there was a kind of long empty hallway between them because that's kind of where you were walking basically underground from one side of the building to the other. But now they've just kind of busted that space between north and south all open. And so now it just kind of feels like one giant continuous cacophony of blinking lights and noise. I was in north and I thought I was in south and I think I was looking for you in the SOC center and I was so turned around and then I had to be at a meeting and I'm like, can't figure out where the escalator is. Very embarrassing, but it happened.
It does. It does. I also spent some quality time trying to figure out, okay, the booth number says 5104 and I'm in row 5100. So where is this booth?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm just getting older and can't read signs anymore, but yes, it's tough to navigate.
Now, speaking of, I had 2 speaking slots and then some other commitments, with various things. You had a very packed agenda. I was trying to slide in for a lunch to see you here or there, but you were actually meeting with a lot of the exhibitors and sponsors pretty much back to back. What kind of maybe themes or hot topics did you see through that?
Yeah, I took a lot of vendor briefings, and I think three things surprised me just sort of as a gestalt looking at all the briefings as a total. One thing that came out is that network segmentation was a hot topic. Companies that I didn't really expect to be talking about segmentation were talking about it. And I was more expecting to hear about AI. I heard a little bit about it, but folks were really getting into we're adding network segmentation to our portfolio or enhancing our network segmentation capabilities. That was not really what I expected at this security show. The other thing was definitely seeing more of an interest in and convergence on that sort of IT OT barrier seems to be falling as OT and IT are realizing, yeah, we need to get together and do stuff and work together as a team because the issues with OT, so IoT devices, industrial control systems, and so on, the risks there are significant. The IT side of the house that's typically been hands off with them. And now there's efforts both on the vendor side and organizationally to try to bring these two communities together more.
There is. That was one of the talks I did actually with Bryson, we've had here on the podcast
Mm-hmm.
and one of the founders of the ICS Village. So we did a harmonizing IT and OT to address it, just that, because so many of these on the IT side and the security side, and sometimes jointly, are now being told to fold in the operational technology infrastructures, not to fold them into the IT network, but to fold them into the purview, at least from the security standpoint, such that the CISOs, and I'm using CISO broadly, but whoever is in charge of security on the IT side needs to have that visibility and some, policy and control on the OT side. But the hard part here is that, OT networks do not look, feel, taste like an IT network. So the tools that we use between the two of them are not always appropriate. Like they might need different tools. So yeah, there were lots of vendors I saw kind of, promoting their OT tweaked offerings. And then there were a lot of talks. We even had ICS Village up in the innovation sandboxy area up on that second mezzanine, which was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was good to see. And back to the notion of segmentation sort of starting to creep into more products. One example is Zscaler there in the SSE or SASE realm, so cloud delivered security. They recently acquired a company called AirGap Networks. That is a zero trust company. They essentially have a device online that sits in your network to watch east-west traffic, and if it sees communications happening between devices that violate policy, it'll kill that communication. I thought that was interesting because Zscaler, their value proposition is we do all our security enforcement in the cloud. The fact that they are looking at a company like AirGap, bringing it into their portfolio means that they also see an opportunity to start spreading into areas they aren't in because they're cloud delivered security. So getting onto their customers' networks as well as being their cloud delivered security solution. Arista Networks announced new microsegmentation capabilities just ahead of the show. And then other vendors I talked to who I don't necessarily put into the microsegmentation box were also talking about new capabilities they're adding to bring segmentation into their portfolio.
Sometimes the microsegmentation that they're talking about are kind of like a cloud microsegmentation and workload or data center microsegmentation versus, well, I'm not going to speak for everybody listening, but what we might think of as kind of LAN-based microsegmentation, especially as we talk about IoT and OT. I think it's interesting because another thing we end up on a lot of consulting calls for is a lot of organizations want one microsegmentation solution to solve all of their use cases, users accessing things, getting these weird headless devices onto a network, and then securing their cloud servers, services, microservices. There isn't one product that even does really two of those very well, but that's starting to happen. So this whole Zscaler AirGap acquisition is really interesting to me. I'd like to see where that goes because AirGap is a very, very heavily on-prem architecture solution. That's how it works. It's not, at least when I saw it, it's not agent-based. It is a network-based enforcement, layer 2, layer 3. Obviously, like you said, Zscaler is, cloud native, born in the cloud, made in the cloud, data path in the cloud, management, everything in the cloud. And I think the vendors are starting to understand that they need to cross those silos of use cases and offer a little bit more of a robust central, oh, how do I not say pane of glass? Maybe a central console, dashboard, visibility, policy manager, and that's really going to be what customers want moving forward. So I'm really interested to see what some of these, again, Zscaler AirGap being very interesting to me. And I think we'll continue to see this kind of microsegmentation and this spreading out past sort of the pedigree of what the company came from into these other areas to offer a whole solution.
Yeah, for sure. One other thing at the RSA conferences, we got to talk to the folks running the SOC. And if you didn't know, RSA, yes, does run a SOC. They're monitoring everything that's going on, wired and wireless at the event, and they came up with some interesting findings.
So one thing that's interesting to me is just the whole setup of the network and the SOC. So the SOC at RSA, unlike a lot of the other infrastructures at security conferences like DEF CON and et cetera, they're actually not spinning up a network. So the SOC is managed by NetWitness and Cisco, and by extension of that, Splunk this year as well was there. But it is the venue's network. So they're using Moscone's network as it is, wireless and wired. And so
Right.
they're just monitoring what's going on there. We talked to Steve over there from NetWitness, and I think there'll be a blog or two coming out of this, but definitely some interesting things that they see and do there. And they don't mess with the settings in the venue network. Everything is just open, super open, no segmentation,
Maybe a little
maybe
too
a little
open.
too open. Yeah.
So some things they said they saw were, people looking at not appropriate for work sites on the show floor.
Just say porn, Drew. Just say porn.
Okay, yes, it's porn on the show floor. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised if there were 41,000 people there, but come on.
Wait, on the show floor. Go to your hotel, get a room. And don't do it from your phone. Get a whole laptop, get the whole visual experience, get a big screen, go to your room, enjoy it, do whatever you need to do, and then come back out and interact with people after you've washed your hands.
Right, go back to your hotel. Don't do it while you're at work. This is still work. The other thing is, I guess Steve didn't want to sort of say this outright, but it seems like there's maybe a little bit of light industrial espionage kind of happening at the edges of these shows.
Yeah. Some nation state activity, dating apps, home cameras. And I think one of the examples he gave was a hunting camera, a deer hunting camera.
Right. People accessing home security systems and stuff from the show floor.
Yep.
Which, because it's an open network, the SOC also got to see.
And Bitcoin mining.
Right. Yes. Somebody trying to get some free compute power from the show.
Yeah. So all kinds of interesting stuff. So again, no segmentation on these. So if you're just kind of picturing this, those 600 exhibitors, any of those that had a wired connection, that was in scope and not segmented. And the Wi-Fi for the attendees and anybody coming into the space was open Wi-Fi, nothing that would break anything. So no filtering, no pure isolation, no nothing. Wild, wild west, wide open network, lots of interesting stuff. And we may or may not have gotten a scan using a NetAlly security device of some of that network. So maybe we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, so just something to keep in mind if you are going to RSA or one of these other conferences, even if it's a security conference, you also probably need to bring a little of your own security in these environments.
Yes, don't be on the wall of shame. There is no wall of shame that is displayed at RSA, but there is a wall of shame that is not displayed at RSA. And Steve did say that they have in years past had to go find people and
have conversations with people.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
Right. Discreetly. They're very discreet about it, but yes. You don't want to be one of those people that they have to come and find.
So let's come back around to AI for a second, because, certainly I think everybody on the show floor had an AI something, and there's definitely this trend in the security operations center, if nothing else, of, leveraging AI. We've had some of the vendors in the networking space that are talking about, AI ops and AI operations for several years. You've got, Juniper's Mist AI that's now AI native, and their goal of sort of this vision of a self-driving network. And now we're starting to see some of the security vendors kind of following that same chain and going, okay, well, we want, autonomous SOC operations and self-driving security teams. And then have been recently some interesting proof of concept of some of the AI technologies in the SOC of being able to eliminate sort of that lowest tier, however you lay that out in your SOC. But that first kind of line of defense or analysis by a junior SOC engineer, they're actually having pretty good results of replacing some of that manual activity with AI-based and machine learning in the SOC. So I think it's coming. It's pretty interesting.
Like I said, I didn't feel like I was overwhelmed by AI pitches in the conversations I had, for which I was grateful, but it's definitely in the air and the water, and every vendor knows they need to have an AI story to tell. My general response is to be a little suspicious until I see, pretty solid proof of concept, or actually talk to customers who are using it before I'm like, yeah, okay, that's real. But we know that our security devices are collecting tons of data. If you have good data scientists who can set up a data lake, normalize the data, and do smart things with it, then yes, AI should be able to help us with a lot of our security tasks. But lots of ifs there.
Now you talked to, I think, like Clarity and maybe a few other of the IoT, OT vendors. Did any of them indicate that they're trying to leverage AI or machine learning in any of their algorithms for profiling?
Yeah, anybody who's working with data is also talking about AI. I did actually talk to Clarity, and one of the things that I guess I shouldn't find it surprising is that one of the challenges they're also still working through is basically device discovery. Do we know everything that's on the network? Can we keep up with everything that's being added and changed on a network? It's still a problem. I don't know that AI is going to help them with that. That's still one of the things they're wrestling with.
It would be a good use if they do. Now, speaking of the expo floor, I also saw one of the recaps. I don't know if you got to see the puppies. Did you see the puppies?
There were puppies?
There were
I missed the
puppies.
puppies.
Oh,
Aw.
Drew, you didn't make it to the puppies.
I missed the puppies.
Yeah. Maybe it was
That's a
Data
shame.
Dog. Oh, whatever the exhibitor was, it had something to do with dogs.
Uh-huh.
So maybe that was it.
So this branding was hit or miss, I guess. You remembered the puppies, not the company.
Yeah, they had a little pin there, and they were all local pooches who were up for adoption. So you could take a little stress timeout moment and pet a pooch, and they were so cute. And I wanted to stay there all day. I also saw photos actually from Chris Furtick, who I met a couple of years ago, speaking at a conference here in Raleigh, of a robot mixology on the expo floor. So looked like One Trust booth here had a little robot. He's a cute little thing. He's sitting up on the table and he looks like he's making drinks.
I think I did see a robot barista, but that seemed to be out of order. So
I could use a robot bartender. I'm pretty easy though. I don't really like anything mixed. I just want something straight. So just
you can't pour that yourself, JJ. Right? What's the point?
now if it could bring it to me.
That's what we need. Yeah, I'll mix it
Mhm.
myself, but if I can just sit on the couch and have you bring it to me or get a fresh glass of ice or something.
Yeah. Isn't that why people have kids? No, I don't know.
Guess it's not easy. I had thought to put my kids too, but I'll have to think about that.
Yeah, so all kinds of fun stuff on the expo floor, all kinds of interesting things on the I don't know how many different sessions they have and speakers, but it's a lot. Like I said, it's kind of overwhelming. I almost wish we had like little mini conferences within the RSA conference based on maybe job role or
Right.
technical depth or yeah, it's just a lot. It's overwhelming. And even being on the program committee, I feel like I don't even know half of what's going on. But I would say the last kind of takeaway or observation for that is that the breadth of security's reach, because I don't know, we go through these fluctuations where it's like security is nichey and then suddenly everybody's doing security and then there's like some focused areas again. And human resilience and burnout was a discussion point, but also operational resilience, cyber resilience, data resilience, backup.
Mhm.
So, we saw Commvault, Cohesity, Rubrik, Veeam, and, some of those players in that space that we think of as, storage or backup and recovery or making their way back into this conversation because that recovery strategy, secure, immutable backups, and then, getting them back into place as a mitigation for ransomware and not just ransomware, but other issues. So, Alex and I did a session on cyber planning for operational resilience, which is basically how do you plan your operations, your network infrastructure, and your cybersecurity for your organization to work in an impaired state. Could be due to a natural disaster. Could be, think about the Colonial Pipeline example, right?
Right.
So there's a lot more planning from the business side that goes into that. And these types of resilience planning and backup is just a huge, huge part of that strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny to think about having storage vendors at a security show, but it does make sense because they are, I guess, literally the last line of your defense. If you can't detect the attack, prevent the attack, you want to be able to get data back up as quickly as possible. So, it's one of these break down the silo conversations where if you aren't talking to your storage team, maybe it's a good idea to because security does touch everything.
Speaking of touching everything, you guys can reach out and touch us as well. I wait for Drew to start laughing at me. There we go.
I was like,
He's like, where is she going with this now?
I'm not going to comment until I see where this ends up. But yes, please carry on.
Hop over to packetpushers.net/FU if you want to leave us some feedback or you have some ideas on topics. You can also find us on LinkedIn and the different social platforms like Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it. You can use hashtag Packet Protector. So we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to have you involved in the conversation. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks for listening.